The sun was setting over Beverly Hills, casting a golden glow across the sprawling city. Inside one of its most luxurious venues, an exclusive jewelry exhibition was underway, drawing in the crème de la crème of society. Among the guests were Chuck Norris and his wife Gina. Known for their quiet elegance and down-to-earth demeanor, the couple stood out in a room filled with opulence and extravagance. Chuck, ever the gentleman, walked slightly behind Gina, letting her lead the way as she admired the stunning displays of diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. Gina had always been fond of beautiful things, but tonight there was something extraordinary on display, a necklace that seemed to capture the light like no other. It was called the Aurora Star, a breathtaking piece valued at $12 million. The centerpiece was a massive diamond surrounded by smaller stones arranged in intricate patterns, resembling the shimmering colors of the northern lights. As Gina approached the glass case housing the necklace, her eyes widened in awe. She leaned closer, marveling at how the gemstones sparkled under the soft lighting. Chuck noticed her fascination and smiled softly. He knew how much Gina loved unique pieces of art, whether it was jewelry or paintings. For him, seeing her happy was worth far more than any material possession. Still, he couldn't help but chuckle inwardly at the absurd price tag attached to this particular treasure. $12 million? That amount could fund countless charities or build schools in underserved communities. But here it was, sitting behind a glass barrier, guarded like a national secret. As Gina continued to admire the necklace, she failed to notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere around her. A few feet away, another guest, an impeccably dressed woman wearing oversized sunglasses, was whispering urgently to a nearby security guard. Her tone was hushed but insistent, pointing toward Gina every so often. At first, the guard dismissed her comments, assuming she was just another wealthy patron trying to stir up drama, but when the woman persisted, claiming she'd seen Gina acting suspiciously near the display, the guard decided to investigate further. Two plainclothes security personnel began circling the area, keeping a close eye on Gina without making their intentions obvious. One of them lingered near the refreshments table while the other pretended to adjust the lighting above the display cases. Chuck, who had spent decades honing his instincts both on-screen and off, immediately sensed something was off. His sharp gaze swept across the room, taking note of the guards' movements. Though they tried to blend into the background, their focus on Gina was unmistakable. For a moment, Chuck debated whether to intervene. After all, these kinds of events often came with heightened security measures, especially given the astronomical value of the items on display. Perhaps the guards were merely doing their job, ensuring nothing went wrong during the evening. Yet deep down, Chuck felt uneasy. There was something about the way they were watching Gina that didn't sit right with him. He moved closer to her, ready to step in if needed. Meanwhile, Gina remained blissfully unaware of the brewing tension. She was lost in thought, imagining what it would feel like to wear such a magnificent piece. Would it feel heavy around her neck, or would it seem weightless like wearing sunlight itself? Lost in her daydreams, she absent-mindedly touched the edge of the display case, tracing the outline of the glass with her fingertips. It was an innocent gesture, one born out of admiration rather than malice. But to the suspicious eyes observing her, it looked like something else entirely. Back at the refreshments table, Chuck grabbed 2 glasses of champagne and handed one to Gina. "You seem mesmerized by that necklace," he said lightly, trying to distract her from whatever might be unfolding behind the scenes. Gina laughed, accepting the drink gratefully. "Can you blame me? It's breathtaking. I've never seen anything like it." Before Chuck could respond, a voice interrupted them. "Excuse me, ma'am?" Both turned to see a sharply dressed man approaching them. He introduced himself as part of the event's security team and asked if he could speak with Gina privately. Chuck raised an eyebrow but nodded slightly, signaling for Gina to follow the man. Something told him this conversation wouldn't end well, but he trusted Gina to handle herself gracefully. As Gina walked away with the security officer, Chuck stayed put, his mind racing. What did they want with her? Was this some sort of routine check, or was there more to it? Whatever the reason, he resolved to stay vigilant. If anyone dared accuse his wife of wrongdoing, they'd better be prepared to face the consequences. Little did they know, Chuck Norris wasn't someone you wanted to cross. Not now, not ever. And as the seconds ticked by, the calm before the storm settled over the room, hinting at the explosive moment that was about to unfold. The sun was setting over Beverly Hills, casting a golden glow across the sprawling city. Inside one of its most luxurious venues, an exclusive jewelry exhibition was underway, drawing in the crème de la crème of society. Among the guests were Chuck Norris and his wife Gina. Known for their quiet elegance and down-to-earth demeanor, the couple stood out in a room filled with opulence and extravagance. Chuck, ever the gentleman, walked slightly behind Gina, letting her lead the way as she admired the stunning displays of diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. Gina had always been fond of beautiful things, but tonight, there was something extraordinary on display. A necklace that seemed to capture the light like no other. It was called the Aurora Star, a breathtaking piece valued at $12 million. The centerpiece was a massive diamond surrounded by smaller stones arranged in intricate patterns, resembling the shimmering colors of the northern lights. As Gina approached the glass case housing the necklace, her eyes widened in awe. She leaned closer, marveling at how the gemstones sparkled under the soft lighting. Chuck noticed her fascination and smiled softly. He knew how much Gina loved unique pieces of art, whether it was jewelry or paintings. For him, seeing her happy was worth far more than any material possession. Still, he couldn't help but chuckle inwardly at the absurd price tag attached to this particular treasure. $12 million? That amount could fund countless charities or build schools in underserved communities. But here it was, sitting behind a glass barrier, guarded like a national secret. As Gina continued to admire the necklace, she failed to notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere around her. A few feet away, another guest, an impeccably dressed woman wearing oversized sunglasses, was whispering urgently to a nearby security guard. Her tone was hushed but insistent, pointing toward Gina every so often. At first, the guard dismissed her comments, assuming she was just another wealthy patron trying to stir up drama. But when the woman persisted, claiming she'd seen Gina acting suspiciously near the display, the guard decided to investigate further. Two plainclothes security personnel began circling the area, keeping a close eye on Gina without making their intentions obvious. One of them lingered near the refreshments table while the other pretended to adjust the lighting above the display cases. Chuck, who had spent decades honing his instincts both on-screen and off, immediately sensed something was off. His sharp gaze swept across the room, taking note of the guards' movements. Though they tried to blend into the background, their focus on Gina was unmistakable. For a moment, Chuck debated whether to intervene. After all, these kinds of events often came with heightened security measures, especially given the astronomical value of the items on display. Perhaps the guards were merely doing their job, ensuring nothing went wrong during the evening. Yet, deep down, Chuck felt uneasy. There was something about the way they were watching Gina that didn't sit right with him. He moved closer to her, ready to step in if needed. Meanwhile, Gina remained blissfully unaware of the brewing tension. She was lost in thought, imagining what it would feel like to wear such a magnificent piece. Would it feel heavy around her neck, or would it seem weightless like wearing sunlight itself? Lost in her daydreams, she absent-mindedly touched the edge of the display case, tracing the outline of the glass with her fingertips. It was an innocent gesture, one born out of admiration rather than malice. But to the suspicious eyes observing her, it looked like something else entirely. Back at the refreshments table, Chuck grabbed 2 glasses of champagne and handed one to Gina. "You seem mesmerized by that necklace," he said lightly, trying to distract her from whatever might be unfolding behind the scenes. Gina laughed, accepting the drink gratefully. "Can you blame me? It's breathtaking. I've never seen anything like it." Before Chuck could respond, a voice interrupted them. "Excuse me, ma'am?" Both turned to see a sharply dressed man approaching them. He introduced himself as part of the event's security team and asked if he could speak with Gina privately. Chuck raised an eyebrow but nodded slightly, signaling for Gina to follow the man. Something told him this conversation wouldn't end well, but he trusted Gina to handle herself gracefully. As Gina walked away with the security officer, Chuck stayed put, his mind racing. What did they want with her? Was this some sort of routine check, or was there more to it? Whatever the reason, he resolved to stay vigilant. If anyone dared accuse his wife of wrongdoing, they'd better be prepared to face the consequences. Little did they know, Chuck Norris wasn't someone you wanted to cross. Not now, not ever. And as the seconds ticked by, the calm before the storm settled over the room, hinting at the explosive moment that was about to unfold. Chuck and Gina returned to the refreshments table, but the tension between them was palpable. Gina's hands trembled slightly as she set her untouched glass of champagne down, still trying to process the absurdity of what had just happened. Chuck, on the other hand, radiated a quiet intensity. His jaw was clenched, his eyes scanning the room with a mix of irritation and resolve. He wasn't one to let things slide, not when it came to protecting his family. "Are you okay?" Chuck asked softly, leaning closer so only Gina could hear him. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it, a tone that signaled he was about to take action. Gina nodded, though her expression betrayed her lingering frustration. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a small smile. "But I can't believe they thought I'd steal something like that. It's ridiculous." Chuck didn't respond immediately. Instead, his gaze locked onto the display case housing the Aurora Star. The necklace sat there glittering innocently under the soft lights, oblivious to the chaos it had inadvertently caused. For a moment, Chuck simply stared at it, his mind working through possibilities. Then, without warning, he straightened up and turned to Gina. "Wait here," he said firmly, his voice carrying a note of finality. Before she could ask what he was planning, he strode purposefully toward the jeweler manning the exhibit booth. Every step he took seemed deliberate, commanding attention from everyone in the room. Conversations paused mid-sentence as heads turned to watch the iconic martial artist approach the display. Even the security guards who had moments ago accused Gina now stood frozen, unsure of what to expect. When Chuck reached the booth, the jeweler, a middle-aged man with slicked back hair and a tailored suit, looked up in surprise. "Mr. Norris," he exclaimed, clearly flustered. "What can I do for you?" Chuck didn't waste time with pleasantries. He pointed directly at the Aurora Star necklace. "How much is it?" he asked bluntly, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the venue. The jeweler blinked, caught off guard by the question. $12 million, he stammered, glancing nervously at the crowd gathering around them. Clearly, this wasn't the kind of transaction he handled every day. Chuck nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Good, I'll take it." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Guests exchanged wide-eyed looks, some murmuring excitedly while others gawked in disbelief. The jeweler himself looked like he'd been struck by lightning. You want to buy it?" "Right now?" he managed to choke out. "That's what I said." Chuck replied evenly, his tone brooking no argument. "Do we have a problem?" The jeweler shook his head rapidly, clearly eager to avoid any conflict. "No problem at all. But sir, purchases of this magnitude usually require paperwork, verification, and I don't care about any of that," Chuck interrupted, his voice firm but controlled. "I'm paying cash. All I need is the necklace." The jeweler hesitated, visibly torn between protocol and the irresistible allure of closing such a monumental sale. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded reluctantly. "All right, Mr. Norris, let me get the manager." As the jeweler scurried off to fetch his superior, the room buzzed with speculation. Some guests whispered theories about Chuck's motives, while others openly admired his boldness. Meanwhile, the security team that had accused Gina earlier hovered uncertainly nearby, their faces painted with a mixture of guilt and awe. They knew they'd made a grave mistake, and now they were watching the fallout unfold in real time. Minutes later, the manager arrived, a tall, impeccably dressed woman with an air of authority. She greeted Chuck with a nervous smile, clearly aware of the gravity of the situation. "Mr. Norris," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "we're honored by your interest in our piece. However, transactions of this size are typically processed over several days, involving legal documentation and I understand. Chuck cut in, his patience wearing thin. But tonight isn't typical. You can either accept my offer now, or lose the sale entirely. Your choice. The manager swallowed hard, glancing between Chuck and the growing audience. She knew she couldn't afford to turn down such a high-profile customer, not when the story of this evening would inevitably make headlines. With a deep breath, she relented. Very well, Mr. Norris. If you're prepared to pay in full, we'll proceed. Chuck gave her a curt nod, then motioned for Gina to join him. As she approached, her eyes widened in shock. Chuck, what are you doing? She whispered urgently, keeping her voice low. He smiled faintly, his eyes twinkling with determination. Teaching them a lesson, he replied simply. Turning back to the manager, he added, Let's see the money. From seemingly nowhere, Chuck produced a sleek black briefcase and placed it on the counter with a thud. The sound echoed through the silent room, drawing even more attention. When he flipped open the lid, jaws dropped in unison. Inside were stacks of crisp $100 bills, neatly arranged and gleaming under the lights. The sheer amount of cash was staggering, a physical manifestation of wealth that left no room for doubt. This should cover it, Chuck said casually, pushing the briefcase toward the manager. Count it if you want. The manager hesitated, clearly overwhelmed by the spectacle unfolding before her. Eventually, she signaled for 2 assistants to verify the funds. While they worked, the crowd continued to murmur in amazement. Phones were whipped out, photos snapped, and videos recorded. This was a moment no one wanted to forget. Meanwhile, Gina stood beside Chuck, torn between embarrassment and pride. On one hand, she couldn't believe he was spending $12 million just to prove a point. On the other hand, she couldn't deny how empowering it felt to see him stand up for her in such a dramatic fashion. It was classic Chuck Norris, bold, decisive, and utterly unforgettable. When the assistants confirmed the money was legitimate, the manager nodded, her face pale but composed. Everything checks out, Mr. Norris. The necklace is yours. Without hesitation, Chuck reached into the display case and carefully lifted the Aurora Star necklace. Holding it delicately in his hands, he turned to Gina and fastened it around her neck. The diamonds sparkled brilliantly against her skin, eliciting a round of applause from the awestruck crowd. For a brief moment, the world seemed to stop spinning. All eyes were on Chuck and Gina, the couple who had transformed a tense and humiliating situation into a triumphant declaration of love and resilience. And as Chuck stepped back to admire his wife wearing the extravagant piece, he shot a pointed glance at the security team and the accuser, who had reappeared in the background. His message was clear. Never underestimate the power of standing up for what's right, or the lengths someone will go to protect the people they love. The room erupted into cheers, but for Chuck and Gina, the victory was bittersweet. They had proven their innocence in the most spectacular way possible, but the memory of the false accusation would linger long after the applause faded. Still, as they walked away together, arm in arm, they knew one thing for certain. No one would ever forget the night Chuck Norris bought a $12 million necklace in cold, hard cash and turned a potential scandal into a legend. The room was electric with energy as Chuck Norris fastened the $12 million Aurora Star necklace around Gina's neck. The dazzling diamonds caught the light, shimmering like stars against her skin, and the crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't just admiration for the beauty of the piece. It was awe at the sheer audacity of what had just unfolded. Here was a man who didn't bother arguing or defending. He simply acted, silencing doubts and accusations with an irrefutable statement of power and love. Gina stood frozen for a moment, her fingers instinctively brushing against the cool metal resting on her collarbone. She felt both exposed and invincible under the weight of the gemstones and the stares of everyone in the room. Her cheeks flushed slightly, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or simply bask in the surreal moment. Chuck, ever attentive, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You look stunning," he murmured softly, his voice cutting through the noise around them. His words carried warmth, but also a quiet pride, as if to say, "This is what happens when you mess with my wife." As the initial shock began to settle, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some guests marveled at Chuck's boldness, while others speculated about the deeper meaning behind his actions. Was it pure impulse, or had he planned this all along? One thing was certain: no one could accuse Chuck Norris of being ordinary. Even in a room full of celebrities, influencers, and wealthy elites, he commanded attention like no one else. Meanwhile, the security team that had accused Gina earlier lingered awkwardly near the edges of the scene, their faces painted with a mix of guilt and disbelief. They exchanged uneasy glances, clearly realizing they'd made a colossal error in judgment. Accusing someone like Gina Norris, a woman known for her philanthropy and grace, was bad enough. But doing so in front of her legendary husband? That was a mistake they would likely regret for years to come. A few members of the staff tried to approach Chuck to offer another apology, but he waved them off dismissively. There was no need for empty words now. The damage had been done, and the lesson had been delivered. The accuser, the woman in oversized sunglasses who had sparked the entire ordeal, was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it she'd slipped out of the venue shortly after Chuck produced the briefcase of cash. Unable to face the fallout of her reckless accusation, those who remained couldn't help but speculate about her motives. Had she genuinely believed Gina was up to something, or had it been a petty act of jealousy? Whatever the reason, her absence spoke volumes. She knew better than to stick around, once the tide had turned so decisively against her. Back at the display booth, the jeweler and his manager scrambled to finalize the transaction. Though thrilled by the sale, they were visibly rattled by the unorthodox nature of the purchase. Handling millions of dollars in cash wasn't part of their usual routine, and the sight of the briefcase filled with stacks of bills had left them momentarily speechless. As they worked, Chuck stood patiently nearby, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. He wasn't gloating or showing off. He didn't need to. His actions had already spoken louder than any boastful remark ever could. When the paperwork was finally completed, the manager handed Chuck a receipt and a certificate of authenticity for the necklace. "Thank you, Mr. Norris," she said, her voice tinged with both gratitude and nervousness. "It's truly an honor to have sold such a remarkable piece to someone like you." Chuck nodded politely but offered no response. He wasn't interested in small talk or formalities. Instead, he turned his attention back to Gina, whose eyes were still wide with disbelief. "Ready to go?" he asked gently, offering her his arm. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, allowing him to lead her away from the chaos. As they made their way toward the exit, the crowd parted like the Red Sea, creating a path for the couple. People clapped and cheered, some even bowing slightly, in jest as Chuck passed by. For many, this moment was the highlight of the evening, a story they would recount for years to come. And yet, despite the adoration surrounding them, Chuck and Gina remained focused on each other. They weren't there to entertain or impress. They were simply two people navigating an extraordinary situation together. Outside the venue, a sleek black car awaited them, its engine idling quietly. The driver stepped forward to open the door, tipping his hat respectfully as Chuck helped Gina inside. Once settled, Gina leaned back against the leather seat, letting out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "I can't believe we just did that," she said, shaking her head in amazement. $12 million cock in cash, who does that?" Chuck chuckled softly, his trademark grin spreading across his face. "Someone who knows how to make a point," he replied. His tone was light, but there was a seriousness beneath it, a reminder that tonight wasn't just about buying a necklace. It was about standing up for what was right, protecting the ones you love, and proving that sometimes actions speak louder than words. As the car pulled away from the curb, Gina glanced down at the Aurora star glittering around her neck. Despite its staggering value, she couldn't shake the feeling that it symbolized more than wealth or luxury. To her, it represented resilience, justice, and the unwavering bond she shared with Chuck. No amount of money could buy the sense of vindication they felt in that moment, or the joy of knowing they'd faced adversity together and come out stronger on the other side. But as the city lights blurred past the car windows, Gina found herself wondering what would happen next. What did one do with a $12 million necklace purchased in such dramatic fashion? Would they keep it as a trophy of sorts? A reminder of the night they turned humiliation into triumph? Or would they find another purpose for it? A way to give back, perhaps, or to share its beauty with the world? For now, though, those questions could wait. Tonight they had earned the right to savor their victory and reflect on the absurdity of it all. As Chuck reached over to take her hand, Gina smiled faintly, feeling a renewed sense of gratitude for the man beside her. In a world where misunderstandings and false accusations could ruin reputations in an instant, having someone willing to fight for you in every sense of the word was priceless. And as the car disappeared into the night, the legend of Chuck Norris grew just a little bit taller, ensuring that this unforgettable chapter would live on forever. The car ride home was quiet, but it wasn't the kind of silence that felt heavy or awkward. Instead, it was a reflective calm, as if both Chuck and Gina were processing everything that had happened at the exhibition. Gina stared out the window, her fingers absently tracing the diamonds of the Aurora Star necklace around her neck. The weight of the gemstones was unfamiliar, but not uncomfortable. It reminded her of the whirlwind evening they'd just experienced. Beautiful, extravagant, and utterly surreal. Chuck sat beside her, his posture relaxed but alert, his eyes occasionally darting to the rearview mirror to check for any signs of paparazzi. He knew their dramatic exit wouldn't go unnoticed for long. News of his impromptu $12 million purchase would spread faster than wildfire, especially in a city like Beverly Hills where gossip traveled almost as quickly as money changed hands. But Chuck didn't seem bothered by the prospect of media attention. If anything, he seemed amused by it. After all, this wasn't the first time his larger-than-life persona had made headlines, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. When they arrived home, Gina stepped out of the car with Chuck's help, still marveling at how surreal the night had been. Their sprawling estate was bathed in moonlight, its manicured gardens glowing softly under the stars. Inside, the house was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold opulence of the jewelry exhibition. As they entered the living room, Gina removed the necklace carefully and placed it on the coffee table, letting it rest there like a glittering artifact from another world. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there looking at the necklace, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Gina broke the silence. "Do you think people will talk about this tomorrow?" she asked, her voice tinged with a mix of curiosity and concern. Chuck chuckled, sinking into one of the plush armchairs. "Oh, I'm sure they will," he replied, leaning back and crossing his legs casually. "But let them talk. That's what happens when you do something unexpected. Besides, it's not every day someone buys a $12 million necklace in cash to shut down an accusation." Gina smiled faintly, though her expression remained thoughtful. "It's crazy, isn't it? We could have walked away after clearing things up, but instead we ended up spending millions just to prove a point." Chuck nodded, his gaze steady. "Sometimes proving a point is worth more than the cost. Those people needed to see that you're not someone who can be pushed around or falsely accused without consequences. And now, thanks to tonight, they'll remember that lesson for a long time." Gina sighed, sitting down across from him. She admired Chuck's confidence, but she couldn't help feeling conflicted about the whole situation. On one hand, she was proud of how they'd handled the ordeal. On the other hand, the extravagance of buying such an expensive piece of jewelry left her uneasy. Money had never been the most important thing to her. It was kindness, integrity, and making a difference in the world that mattered most. And while the necklace was undeniably stunning, it felt almost excessive compared to the values she held dear. "Chuck," she said after a pause, her tone serious, "what are we going to do with it?" He raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she continued, gesturing toward the necklace, "we didn't buy this because we wanted it. We bought it because of everything that happened. So should we keep it? Or is there a better way to use it?" Chuck leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He hadn't considered what would happen to the necklace after tonight. His focus had been solely on protecting Gina and sending a message to those who had wronged her. But now that the dust had settled, her question made perfect sense. What purpose did a $12 million necklace serve sitting in their home? Wasn't there a way to turn this extraordinary moment into something meaningful? "You're right," he said finally, his voice thoughtful. "This isn't just about us anymore, it's bigger than that. Maybe we can find a way to share its beauty with others, or even use it to help people." Gina's face lit up at the idea. "Like donating it to a museum?" she suggested eagerly. "Imagine how many people could see it and appreciate its craftsmanship. It could inspire artists, historians, and dreamers alike." Chuck nodded slowly, warming to the concept. "That's a great idea. Or maybe we auction it off and donate the proceeds to charity. Either way, it doesn't have to stay locked away in a display case here." As they discussed the possibilities, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The tension and frustration from earlier in the evening melted away, replaced by excitement and purpose. This wasn't just about reclaiming dignity or teaching someone a lesson. It was about transforming a negative experience into something positive. For Gina, the thought of giving the necklace a new life filled her with hope. For Chuck, it reinforced the importance of using their resources to make a difference. By the time they went to bed that night, they had decided on a plan. The Aurora Star wouldn't remain a personal trophy. Instead, it would become a symbol of generosity and resilience. Whether through donation or auction, they would ensure that its brilliance reached far beyond the confines of their home. The next morning, the story of the previous night's events had already begun to circulate. Social media was ablaze with photos and videos of Chuck pulling out the briefcase of cash, fastening the necklace around Gina's neck, and walking away triumphantly. Headlines ranged from playful, "Chuck Norris buys $12 million necklace," to "Prove a point," to analytical, "The power of wealth, how Chuck Norris turned an accusation into a legacy." Friends and family called to congratulate them, some teasingly referring to the incident as the ultimate mic drop. Through it all, Chuck and Gina remained grounded. They laughed at the memes and jokes shared online, knowing that humor was part of the package when you lived in the public eye. But they also stayed focused on their goal, finding the best way to repurpose the Aurora Star. Over the following days, they consulted with experts, explored options, and ultimately chose to loan the necklace to a prestigious museum for a limited-time exhibit. The announcement was met with widespread acclaim, further cementing the couple's reputation as generous and forward-thinking individuals. Reflecting on the entire experience, Gina realized that the true value of the necklace wasn't in its price tag or dazzling appearance. It was in the lessons it represented: standing up for yourself, refusing to let false accusations define you, and turning adversity into opportunity. For Chuck, it was a reminder of the power of love and loyalty, not just in words but in actions. And so, as the Aurora Star took its place in the museum, surrounded by admirers and protected by glass once again, Chuck and Gina found peace in knowing they had turned a challenging moment into something truly remarkable. Their story became a modern-day fable, a testament to the strength of character and the belief that even in the darkest times, light can shine through, if you're willing to fight for it. The museum exhibit opened just 3 months after that unforgettable night, drawing crowds from all over the world. The Aurora Star, a legend, reimagined, was the headline splashed across billboards, magazines, and social media platforms. The necklace, once a symbol of luxury and exclusivity, had taken on a new life, a beacon of resilience, generosity, and human spirit. For Chuck Norris and Gina, it wasn't about basking in the spotlight. It was about sharing a story that transcended wealth and fame. On the opening day of the exhibit, the museum was packed with visitors eager to catch a glimpse of the famed $12 million necklace. Families, tourists, art enthusiasts, and even school groups lined up outside, their excitement palpable. Inside, the Aurora Star sat at the center of an elegantly designed display, surrounded by soft lighting and accompanied by plaques detailing its history, including the dramatic tale of how it came to be donated. Photographs of Chuck placing the necklace around Gina's neck were displayed prominently, alongside quotes from interviews where the couple explained their decision to share the piece with the public. As Gina walked through the exhibit hall hand in hand with Chuck, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. People weren't just admiring the beauty of the diamonds, they were connecting with the meaning behind them. Parents pointed out the necklace to their children, explaining how kindness and standing up for oneself could turn even the most challenging situations into something positive. Art students sketched the intricate design of the Aurora star, inspired not only by its craftsmanship but also by the values it represented. Chuck, ever humble, kept his hands in his pockets as he observed the scene. He didn't need to say much. His presence alone commanded respect and admiration. When fans approached him for autographs or selfies, he obliged graciously, always taking a moment to thank them for coming. "It's not about us," he told one young fan who asked why they'd given away such an expensive item. "It's about showing people that when life throws challenges your way, you can choose to rise above them, and maybe even make the world a little brighter while you're at it." Gina nodded in agreement, adding, "This necklace is beautiful, but its real power comes from what it stands for. It reminds us that we all have the ability to create change, no matter how big or small." Their words resonated deeply with those who heard them, sparking conversations long after the couple had moved on to another part of the exhibit. Journalists covering the event wrote glowing articles, praising Chuck and Gina not just for their philanthropy but for using their platform to inspire others. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Aurora Legacy and A Rise Above, as people shared stories of overcoming adversity in their own lives. The Aurora star had become more than a piece of jewelry. It was now a catalyst for hope and action, but the impact didn't stop there. In addition to loaning the necklace to the museum, Chuck and Gina announced plans to auction it off at the end of the exhibit's run, with all proceeds going to charity. They partnered with several organizations focused on education, healthcare, and supporting underprivileged communities. The announcement generated even more attention, with celebrities and philanthropists pledging to attend the auction and bid generously. Some joked that the final price might exceed the original $12 million given the necklace's newfound significance. In the weeks leading up to the auction, Chuck and Gina traveled extensively, speaking at events and meeting individuals whose lives had been touched by similar acts of generosity. They visited schools, hospitals, and community centers, listening to stories of struggle and triumph. Each encounter reinforced their belief that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or possessions. It was measured in the connections we forge and the lives we touch. When the night of the auction finally arrived, anticipation reached a fever pitch. Held in a grand ballroom adorned with chandeliers and velvet drapes, the event attracted some of the biggest names in entertainment, business, and philanthropy. Cameras flashed as Chuck and Gina entered the room, greeted by thunderous applause. Though they were used to being in the public eye, this moment felt different, more personal, more meaningful. The auctioneer began the bidding process, starting at $10 million. Within seconds, the numbers skyrocketed, fueled by fierce competition among wealthy bidders determined to own a piece of history. But what made the evening truly special was the number of anonymous donors contributing smaller amounts, collectively raising millions alongside the high-profile bids. By the time the gavel fell, the Aurora star had sold for an astonishing $15 million, a record-breaking sum that would fund countless initiatives aimed at improving lives around the globe. As the crowd erupted into cheers, Chuck stepped onto the stage to deliver a brief speech. His voice was steady and heartfelt as he addressed the audience. "Tonight isn't about me or my wife," he began, pausing to let his words sink in. "It's about every single person who believes in the power of compassion and courage. We've seen tonight that when we come together, we can achieve incredible things. Not because of money, but because of the love and determination we put into making the world a better place." Gina joined him on stage, her eyes glistening with emotion. Together, they accepted a plaque commemorating the funds raised and the lives that would be impacted. As they stood there side by side, it was clear that their bond was stronger than ever, not just as husband and wife, but as partners committed to leaving a lasting legacy. In the days and weeks that followed, news outlets continued to cover the story, highlighting the ripple effect of Chuck and Gina's actions. Schools received funding for arts programs, medical facilities acquired life-saving equipment, and families struggling to make ends meet found relief through grants and scholarships. Every dollar raised carried with it the spirit of the Aurora Star, a reminder that beauty and strength often emerge from adversity. For Chuck and Gina, the experience reinforced their core beliefs, that love conquers fear, that integrity speaks louder than accusations, and that generosity has the power to transform lives. They knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. Life rarely was, but they faced it with unwavering optimism, knowing they had each other and a purpose greater than themselves. And so the legend of the Aurora Star lived on, not as a tale of extravagance or revenge, but as a testament to the enduring power of humanity. Chuck Norris may have been known for his martial arts prowess and larger-than-life persona, but this chapter of his story proved that sometimes the greatest victories are won not with fists, but with heart. And Gina, standing proudly beside him, reminded everyone that grace and resilience could shine brighter than any diamond.